In 1998, a young woman vanished from a Caribbean cruise ship in the middle of the ocean. Her father saw her sleeping at 5:30 a.m. By 6 a.m., she was gone. No struggle, no witnesses, no trace. But years later, shocking photographs and eyewitness sightings suggested she might still be alive, trapped in a nightmare no one believed possible. This is the haunting mystery of Amy Lynn Bradley. Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dive mystery stories. The spring of 1998 arrived in Virginia with the promise of new beginnings. For 23-year-old Amy Lynn Bradley, life was unfolding exactly as she had planned. She had graduated from Longwood University just over a year earlier with a degree in physical education and sports psychology, walking across that stage in December 1996 with her family beaming in the audience. The full basketball scholarship that had carried her through college was a testament to her athletic abilities, honed during years at L.C. Byrd High School, where she had made a name for herself on the court. But Amy was more than just an athlete. She had the kind of presence that made people remember her. Standing 5 feet 7 inches tall with short brown hair and striking green eyes, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who knew exactly who she was and where she was going. Those who knew her described a young woman who was friendly, outgoing, and fiercely independent. By early 1998, Amy had built a life she was proud of. She worked full-time at Ruth's Chris Steakhouse in Chesterfield County, saving money and planning her next move. That next move was coming soon. She had accepted a position at a computer consulting firm set to start the Monday after she returned from an upcoming vacation. The excitement of a new career chapter buzzed through her days. Just before the trip, she had moved into a new apartment, her own space to decorate and make her own. She had already picked up souvenirs and planned to create a photo collage for her new coffee table. And then there was Daisy, the female bulldog puppy she had just adopted. The little dog was staying with family while Amy took one last trip before diving into her new job. That trip was a gift, in a way. Her father, Ron Bradley, was a successful insurance executive who had won an all-expenses-paid Caribbean cruise through his employer. It seemed like perfect timing, a chance for the family to spend time together before Amy's life got busier with her new career. Ron and his wife Iva thought it would be wonderful to bring both their children along. Amy's younger brother Brad had just returned home from college, and the cruise would give them all a chance to reconnect as a family. There was just one hesitation in Amy's mind. Despite being a trained lifeguard and strong swimmer, someone who had spent summers watching over pools and understanding water safety, she had a fear of heights. The idea of being on a massive vessel in the middle of the open ocean made her anxious. The Rhapsody of the Seas was enormous, capable of carrying up to 2,400 passengers and 765 crew members. But her excitement about spending time with Brad and the promise of warm Caribbean sunshine outweighed her nervousness. Amy packed 15 rolls of film for the trip. She wanted to capture everything, to create memories she could look back on. She bought postcards to mail to friends. She prepared herself for an adventure, never imagining that this vacation would become something else entirely. On March 24, 1998, the Bradley family flew from Virginia to San Juan, Puerto Rico. That afternoon, they stepped onto the Rhapsody of the Seas, a gleaming white Royal Caribbean International cruise ship that would take them to several Caribbean destinations, including Aruba and the Dutch island of Curaçao, off the coast of Venezuela. As the ship pulled away from port, Amy stood on deck with her family, watching San Juan fade into the distance. The Caribbean Sea stretched endlessly before them, turquoise and inviting. The vacation had begun. The first days of the cruise passed in a blur of sunshine and relaxation. The Bradleys fell into the easy rhythm of vacation life. Buffet breakfasts with ocean views, afternoons by the pool, evenings spent planning the next day's activities. The ship itself was like a floating city with restaurants, shops, theaters, and endless corridors to explore. When the Rhapsody of the Seas docked in Aruba, the family rented a Jeep and toured the island. They drove along coastal roads, stopped at scenic overlooks, and soaked in the natural beauty of the place. Amy took photos constantly, burning through rolls of film, capturing moments she wanted to remember forever. From one of the ports, she mailed postcards to friends back home, writing enthusiastically about the trip and the upcoming stop in Curaçao. But beneath the surface of this perfect vacation, there were moments that would later take on darker significance. Amy had caught the attention of several crew members. It was perhaps inevitable. She was young, attractive, friendly. But some of the attention felt more persistent than it should have been. Ivy Bradley noticed it and found it obnoxious, the way certain crew members seemed to hover around her daughter. One waiter in particular was especially persistent. He was Portuguese, friendly enough on the surface, but he kept approaching the family with the same question. Would Amy like to go to a bar in Aruba called Carlos and Charlie's? He asked multiple times, always suggesting they go there when the ship docked. The family politely declined each time, but the invitations kept coming. Years later, that bar's name would send chills down their spines. In 2005, 7 years after Amy disappeared, Carlos and Charlie's would become infamous as the last place another young woman was seen before she vanished. Her name was Natalie Holloway, and she would disappear in Aruba under mysterious circumstances that would captivate the world. The connection between the two cases would never be proven, but it would fuel endless speculation about whether predators were specifically targeting young women at that location. But in March 1998, Carlos and Charlie's was just a bar, and the waiter's invitations seemed like nothing more than overly enthusiastic hospitality. The days passed. The ship moved from port to port, and then came March 23rd, the last full night of the cruise. The ship's upper decks had been transformed for a Mardi Gras-themed party. Purple, green, and gold decorations hung from every surface. Music pulsed from speakers. Passengers crowded the decks in festive attire, celebrating their last night before returning to reality. The atmosphere was electric, filled with the particular energy that comes when people know their vacation is ending and want to squeeze every last moment of enjoyment from it. Amy and Brad decided to make the most of the evening. They made their way to the Blue Orchid Lounge, a disco on the ship's 9th-floor deck. The space was packed with people dancing, drinking, socializing. The ship's house band, also called Blue Orchid, was providing the entertainment that night. The band was good. They played crowd favorites, songs that got people on their feet. Among the musicians was a bassist who stood out immediately. His name was Alistair Douglas, but everyone called him Yellow, a reference to his signature brightly dyed yellow hair. He was charismatic on stage, 24 years old, originally from Grenada. Music had been his life since childhood. He learned guitar at church when he was 8, joined a gospel band at 14, and played in the Royal Grenada Police Force Band at 18 before landing this gig with Royal Caribbean. The night wore on. Amy and Brad danced. They met other passengers. The music played. And at some point during the evening, Amy and Alistair Douglas crossed paths. There was a videographer on the ship that night, a man named Chris Fenwick, who was filming the festivities. His camera captured moments that would become some of the last known footage of Amy Lynn Bradley. In the videos, she's smiling, dancing, clearly enjoying herself. In several frames, she's dancing with Douglas, the bassist with the yellow hair. They appear to be talking, laughing, comfortable in each other's company. According to what Douglas would later tell investigators, he finished performing a little after midnight. Amy approached him after the set, he said, and complimented the band's performance. She told him she played saxophone. They talked music. Other band members joined them, and the group had drinks together in the club. Douglas would later claim that Amy told him something personal that night. She said her father had recently discovered she was gay and had forced her to come on this cruise. The Bradley family would vehemently deny this claim. They would say that Amy had been excited about the trip, that there was no forcing involved, that this was simply not true. What happened in those conversations, what was really said, would become impossible to verify. There were only the recollections of those who were there, and memories become unreliable, especially when they're recalled years later under the pressure of investigation. What is certain is that the party continued into the early morning hours. People came and went from the Blue Orchid Lounge. The music eventually stopped. The crowds thinned. And sometime after 1 a.m., according to Douglas, he left the party alone and headed to a staff elevator. He would maintain that he did not see where Amy went after that, that their paths simply diverged in the way paths do at the end of a night. But Amy and Brad both returned to their family's cabin eventually. The ship's computerized door lock system, which recorded every entry, showed Brad returning at 3:35 in the morning. Amy followed 5 minutes later at 3:40 a.m. Their cabin was on the 8th deck, a suite with a balcony overlooking the ocean. The siblings stepped out onto that balcony together, not ready for sleep yet. The Caribbean air was warm, the sea calm. The ship moved steadily through the darkness toward Curaçao, their next destination. Amy and Brad talked quietly, smoking cigarettes, enjoying the peaceful moment. Eventually, Brad's exhaustion won. He went inside and collapsed into bed, falling asleep almost immediately. Amy stayed outside. Maybe she was still restless. Maybe she was just enjoying the solitude, the sound of the waves, the vast darkness of the ocean stretching to the horizon. At some point, she settled into one of the lounge chairs on the balcony. The night was peaceful. The ship was quiet. Most passengers were asleep. Sometime between 5:15 and 5:30 in the morning, Ron Bradley woke briefly. It's the kind of thing fathers do, that instinctive check on your children even when they're adults. He looked toward the balcony and saw Amy there, asleep on the lounge chair. The yellow shirt she had worn out that evening was visible in the dim light. She looked peaceful, safe. Satisfied, Ron went back to sleep. 30 minutes later, everything changed. Ron Bradley woke again around 6 a.m. The sun was starting to rise, painting the sky in soft colors. He looked toward the balcony, perhaps planning to wake Amy so she wouldn't miss the sunrise, or maybe just checking on her again. The lounge chair was empty. The balcony door was slightly ajar. Her shoes remained where she had left them. The yellow shirt she had been wearing was still in the cabin, but Amy was gone. At first, Ron wasn't worried. She had probably gone to get coffee, or maybe she was taking a walk around the deck, stretching her legs, watching the sunrise from a different vantage point. The ship was large, and Amy was an independent young woman who liked to explore. But minutes passed. 10 minutes became 20. 20 became 30. The worry that had been a small seed in Ron's mind began to grow. He got dressed and left the cabin, checking the immediate area. The corridors were mostly empty, just a few early-rising passengers and crew members beginning their morning routines. He walked to the nearest dining area. Not there. He checked the pool deck, empty except for staff preparing for the day ahead. An hour had passed now. Ron returned to the cabin and woke Iva and Brad. Something was wrong. The three Bradleys split up and began a systematic search of the ship. They checked every public area they could think of: dining halls, lounges, the fitness center, the shops. They walked the outer decks, scanning the horizon as if Amy might somehow be in the water, though that made no sense. They asked every crew member they encountered the same question. Have you seen a young woman, 5'7", short brown hair, green eyes? The descriptions grew more detailed as their desperation increased. Amy had distinctive tattoos: a Tasmanian devil spinning a basketball on her left shoulder blade, a Chinese symbol on her right ankle, a green and blue gecko lizard around her navel, a sun on her lower back. She wore a belly button ring and had multiple ear piercings. Surely someone had seen her, but no one had. By the time the Bradleys made their way to the purser's office, they were frantic. They needed the ship to act immediately, lock down the vessel, prevent anyone from disembarking, make an emergency announcement, search every cabin, every storage room, every possible space where someone could be. The response they received would haunt them forever. The crew members at the purser's office told them it was too early to make a ship-wide announcement. They would need to wait. An announcement would be made at 7:50 a.m., they were told, after the ship had docked in Curaçao and after most passengers had already disembarked for their day excursions. The Bradleys couldn't believe what they were hearing. Wait? Their daughter was missing. Every minute could matter. Why would they wait? But the cruise ship protocols, whatever they were, did not bend to the family's urgency. The ship docked in Curaçao on schedule. The gangplank was lowered. Passengers began streaming off the vessel, excited to explore the island. Crew members came and went freely. More than 2 hours passed before any announcement was made. When it finally came over the ship's PA system, it was almost casual in its understatement. "Will Amy Bradley please come to the purser's desk?" The words echoed through the ship, reaching thousands of ears, most of whom barely registered them. Just another passenger being paged. Nothing unusual. But for the Bradleys, those words represented a catastrophic failure. If Amy had left the ship voluntarily, the delay had given her hours to disappear into Curaçao. If someone had taken her, the kidnappers now had a massive head start. The window for finding her, for stopping whatever was happening, had slammed shut. Between 12:15 p.m. and 1 p.m., 6 full hours after Ron had first discovered Amy missing, the cruise staff finally conducted a thorough search of the Rhapsody of the Seas. They checked every cabin, every storage area, every crew quarter, every engine room, every accessible space on the massive vessel. Amy Lynn Bradley was nowhere to be found. The ship that had seemed so large when they boarded suddenly felt impossibly small. How could someone vanish from a confined space surrounded by ocean? Where could she have gone? Royal Caribbean security team began conducting interviews. The FBI was notified, and agents were dispatched to the ship. The Netherlands Antilles Coast Guard launched an extensive search operation, deploying 3 helicopters and a radar-equipped plane to scan the waters around Curaçao and the route the ship had traveled overnight. The Coast Guard crews flew low over the Caribbean Sea, looking for any sign of a person in the water. Clothing, personal items, anything that might indicate Amy had fallen or jumped overboard. They searched for 4 straight days, covering hundreds of square miles. They found nothing. Not a single piece of physical evidence to suggest Amy Bradley had ever been in that water. The initial theory, the one that naturally comes to mind on a cruise ship, was that Amy had somehow fallen overboard. An accident, a terrible tragedy. But as investigators looked at the facts, that theory fell apart. Amy was a trained lifeguard, an excellent swimmer. She understood water safety better than most people ever would. She had not been intoxicated to the point of losing her faculties. The seas had been calm that night, not rough enough to throw someone off balance. The balcony railings were high, designed specifically to prevent accidents. You couldn't just tumble over them. And if she had fallen, surely someone would have heard something, a splash, a cry for help. The ocean around a cruise ship isn't silent. The ship's engines, the movement through water, it all creates constant noise. But a human voice or the sound of someone hitting water from that height would have been audible. The crew on night watch, other passengers who might have been awake, someone should have heard something. But no one reported hearing anything unusual at all. The suicide theory was similarly problematic. Everything in Amy's life pointed forward, not toward an ending. She had just moved into a new apartment. She had adopted a puppy who was waiting for her at home. She was starting her dream job in just a few days. Her family described her as excited about life, happy, planning for her future. There was no history of depression, no suicide note, no indication whatsoever that she would take her own life. The FBI's assessment was direct. There was no evidence that Amy, a trained lifeguard, fell overboard, was pushed, or committed suicide, which left only one possibility, the one that made the Bradleys' blood run cold. Someone had taken their daughter. The Bradleys returned to Virginia in a daze of shock and grief. But they refused to accept that Amy was simply gone. They immediately began their own investigation, printing thousands of flyers with Amy's photo and description. They contacted every media outlet they could reach. They appeared on television programs, their faces drawn with exhaustion and fear, pleading for anyone with information to come forward. They established a tip line and a website. They offered a reward for information about Amy's whereabouts, starting at $25,000 and eventually increasing it to $260,000, one of the largest rewards ever offered in a missing person case. The FBI deepened its investigation, interviewing everyone who had been on the Rhapsody of the Seas that week, hundreds of passengers, dozens of crew members. They collected statements, compared timelines, looked for inconsistencies or suspicious behavior, and slowly witnesses began to emerge. 2 women came forward claiming they had possibly seen Amy around 6 a.m. that morning after her father had found her missing from the balcony. They said they had seen her in one of the glass elevators with a musician from the ship's band. The timing was specific enough to be important. If these women were right, Amy had been alive and moving about the ship well after Ron had last seen her sleeping. 2 college students approached Eva Bradley with a similar account. They claimed they had seen Amy at 5:45 a.m. with Alistair Douglas, the bassist with the yellow hair. The name kept coming up. Yellow, Douglas, the last person known to have spent significant time with Amy before she disappeared. Brad Bradley would later describe a disturbing encounter that occurred shortly after Amy vanished, while the ship was still docked in Curaçao and the family was desperately searching. He was sitting alone by the pool, lost in worry and fear, when someone approached him. It was Douglas. The first words out of his mouth were, "Hey man, I'm sorry to hear about your sister." Brad felt something cold settle in his stomach. At that moment, no public announcement had been made about Amy's disappearance beyond that single vague page over the PA system hours later. The captain knew, the family knew, security knew. But how did a band member know? How did Douglas know that Brad's sister was missing? The FBI brought Douglas in for extensive questioning. He maintained his story. He had spent time with Amy at the party. They had talked about music. He had left around 1 a.m. and had no idea what happened after that. He hadn't seen her leave, hadn't seen her with anyone else, didn't know where she went. They asked him to take a polygraph test. He agreed. The results came back inconclusive. Not a pass, but not a failure either. The test couldn't clear him, but it couldn't implicate him either. Ron Bradley watched Douglas emerge from the FBI interview, and what he saw made his blood boil. Douglas was smiling, giving thumbs up to his bandmates who were waiting nearby. Like everything was fine. Like this was all just an inconvenience. "I knew what was going on," Ron would later say, his voice heavy with bitterness. "I knew he had been with Amy. But knowing and proving are different things." The FBI searched Douglas's room and those of his bandmates. They found nothing suspicious, no evidence of a struggle, no signs of foul play, no physical evidence linking Douglas to Amy's disappearance. Without concrete proof, there were no grounds to charge him with anything. The Rhapsody of the Seas continued on its scheduled route, departing Curaçao for St. Martin and St. Thomas, before finally returning to San Juan on March 28th. The FBI joined additional searches at each port, but Amy remained missing. It was as if she had simply evaporated into the Caribbean air. The case grew cold almost immediately, without a crime scene, without witnesses to an actual abduction, without physical evidence. There was nothing to reconstruct. Investigators were left with a baffling set of facts and a timeline with a 30-minute gap that swallowed a human being. Special Agent James Weber summed up the frustration in November 1998. We've pursued every angle, from whether there was foul play, a suicide, or an accident, and we have basically not gotten anywhere. But the Bradley family couldn't give up. And then, just when it seemed like Amy had vanished without a trace, the sightings began. In April 1998, 1 month after Amy disappeared, Ron and Brad returned to Curacao. They couldn't just sit at home waiting. They distributed flyers throughout the island, showed Amy's photo to locals, followed up on every possible lead no matter how thin. During this trip, they were approached by a taxi driver who claimed to have seen Amy on March 24th, the morning she disappeared. He remembered her, he said, because of her distinctive green eyes, which had been described on the reward posters they were handing out. According to the driver, he had seen a young woman matching Amy's description running through a parking lot near the port while the cruise ship was docking. She had appeared distressed, frantic, like she was searching for something. When he asked if she needed help, she had told him urgently that she needed to make a phone call. The driver gave Ron and Brad specific locations on the island where he suggested they search. The father and son spent days visiting each location, showing Amy's photo to anyone who would look, asking questions, desperately hoping to find something concrete. But the lead went nowhere. They couldn't verify the driver's story. They couldn't find anyone else who had seen what he described. The account remained in that terrible limbo of being impossible to prove, but also impossible to completely dismiss. And then came the sighting that changed everything. In August 1998, 5 months after Amy vanished, a Canadian engineer named David Carmichael was diving at a beach called Port Omari in Curacao. It was a beautiful day, perfect for diving. He was on the beach organizing his equipment when he noticed a woman walking toward him. She was flanked by 2 men, one on each side. But it was her expression that caught Carmichael's attention. She looked frightened, not uncomfortable, not annoyed, frightened. It was not the face of someone enjoying a beach vacation. Carmichael called out in English to a friend who was a few feet away, some casual comment about the diving gear. At the sound of the English language, the woman's reaction was immediate and striking. She spun around and began walking quickly toward Carmichael, putting distance between herself and the 2 men. Within seconds, she was only 3 or 4 feet away from him. Close enough that he could see her face clearly, could observe details that would later seem critically important. The woman opened her mouth about to speak, but before she could say a word, one of the men made a distinct motion, a clear signal. Walk away. The woman's face fell. She turned reluctantly and entered a small cafe with the 2 men, but she kept glancing back at Carmichael. Her eyes seemed to be trying to communicate something, a silent plea he couldn't understand in the moment. Carmichael continued to observe the group as they sat at the outdoor bar. He was close, just 2 feet away at one point, close enough to see specific details about the woman. She had distinctive tattoos, one on her shoulder that appeared to be a Tasmanian devil, markings on her ankle, a design around her navel. She also had what looked like a scar on her right shin. At the time, Carmichael had no idea who Amy Bradley was. He thought the encounter was odd, unsettling even, but he didn't act on it. He was on vacation. He didn't know what to do with the vague sense that something was wrong. Months later, back in Canada, Carmichael was watching television when a program called Unsolved Mysteries came on. They were featuring a case about a young woman who had disappeared from a cruise ship in the Caribbean. As soon as Amy's photo appeared on screen, Carmichael felt his heart stop. The tattoos, the green eyes, the physical description, everything matched. The woman he had seen on that beach, the woman who had looked so frightened, who had tried to approach him before being signaled away by those men, had been Amy Bradley. He was certain, absolutely certain. Carmichael immediately contacted the Bradley family. When Ron and Iva heard his account, they felt a surge of hope mixed with horror. Hope because it meant Amy might be alive. Horror because it meant she was being held against her will, unable to escape, trying desperately to signal for help to strangers who didn't understand. Carmichael flew to Virginia to meet with the family in person. He sat with them for hours, recounting every detail he could remember, the way Amy had moved, her expression, the behavior of the two men. In his description, one of them resembled Alistair Douglas, the bassist with the yellow hair. He worked with FBI investigators, describing not just Amy's appearance, but the exact location, the time of day, the demeanor of everyone involved. His credibility was strong. He was an educated professional with no reason to fabricate such a story, and critically, he accurately described details about Amy's tattoos that were not widely publicized at the time. The FBI investigated the sighting. They searched the area Carmichael had indicated. They interviewed people in Curacao. They followed up with local authorities. But they were unable to corroborate the sighting or locate Amy. The lead, as compelling as it was, led to another dead end, yet Carmichael never wavered. Years later, he would state firmly, "I am haunted by that encounter with Amy. I know it was her. It's 100%, not even 99%. It was her." The sighting added weight to a theory that was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Amy hadn't fallen overboard. She hadn't committed suicide. She had been kidnapped, and she was being held somewhere in the Caribbean. Then, in January 1999, another report emerged that made the Bradleys' worst fears seem terrifyingly real. A U.S. Navy petty officer named William Hefner was stationed in Curacao when his ship made port on the island. During his time ashore, Hefner visited an establishment that local authorities would later describe as a brothel. He was in the bar area when a Caucasian woman approached him. She recognized him as American. Perhaps it was his military haircut, his bearing, something that marked him as someone from home. She spoke directly and urgently. "My name is Amy Bradley," she told him. "I need help." According to Hefner's account, the woman explained that she had been on a cruise and had gotten off the ship. She was now being held against her will and couldn't escape. She pleaded with him to help her. She pointed out that there was a U.S. naval ship just 5 minutes down the dock. She could leave with him, she suggested. He could help her get to safety. Hefner froze. He didn't know what to do, how to respond. And before he could fully process what was happening, 2 men arrived and removed the woman from the bar, telling her to go upstairs. She looked back at Hefner as they led her away, and then she was gone. Hefner did not report the encounter. He would later explain that he feared the repercussions of having been in such an establishment, the potential damage to his military career. He told himself maybe he had misunderstood, maybe it wasn't what it seemed. He rationalized his inaction in the way people do when they're confronted with something their mind can't quite process. Years passed. Hefner retired from the Navy, and the encounter haunted him. In May 2002, 4 years after that night in Curacao, Hefner saw Amy's case featured in a magazine. He recognized her from the missing person photo. The memory of that woman in the brothel came flooding back. He was convinced the woman who had approached him, who had given him her name, who had begged for help, had been Amy Bradley. He finally reached out to the Bradley family. The FBI investigated Hefner's claims, but by then it was too late. The brothel where he claimed to have encountered Amy had burned down. There were no records, no witnesses they could locate, no way to substantiate his account. The lead, like so many others, dissolved into uncertainty, but the pattern was becoming clear. Multiple credible witnesses in different locations at different times, all claiming to have seen Amy. Not glimpses that could be explained by similarity or wishful thinking, but encounters where the woman had distinctive tattoos, had tried to communicate distress, had been accompanied by men who appeared to be controlling her movements. The theory that investigators and the Bradley family could no longer avoid was as old as human evil itself, human trafficking. The Caribbean, for all its tourist appeal and crystal blue waters, had long been known as a hub for illegal activities. Human trafficking, the forced labor and sexual exploitation of vulnerable individuals, operated in the shadows of paradise. And cruise ships, with their transient populations and complex jurisdictional issues, could serve as hunting grounds. If Amy had been targeted and abducted, traffickers would have had only a brief window to get her off the ship while it was docked in Curaçao. But once she was on the island, she could be moved between locations, kept under control through drugs, threats, or physical restraint. The sightings from Carmichael and Hefner suggested she may have been trying to escape or signal for help whenever opportunities arose, brief moments when her captor's attention wavered. "My intuition as a mother is somebody's got her," Eva Bradley said in an interview. "Somebody saw her, somebody wanted her, and somebody took her." The family filed lawsuits against Royal Caribbean Cruises in 1999, alleging negligence in the handling of Amy's disappearance. They claimed the cruise line's delayed response and failure to secure the ship had enabled her abduction. But the legal proceedings became complicated. To pursue a wrongful death suit, they had been advised by lawyers to have Amy declared legally dead, which required a death certificate. The family reluctantly agreed, even though they believed Amy was alive. The lawsuits were dismissed in 2000. The Bradleys would later acknowledge this as a mistake, explaining that they had listened to lawyers who assured them it was the right approach. The case never made it to trial, but they never stopped searching. Years passed. The case appeared periodically in media, featured on shows like Disappeared, America's Most Wanted, and Dr. Phil. The FBI maintained an active missing persons page for Amy, updating it with age-progressed images. And then, in September 2005, 7 years after Amy vanished, the Bradley family received an email that would haunt them forever. An anonymous source sent photographs to the family's tip line. The images had allegedly been found on an adult website based in the Caribbean. They showed a woman who closely resembled Amy, though her hair was longer and styled differently. The woman was in a state of partial undress, appearing distressed and despondent. The photographs identified the woman with the name Jazz, presented as a worker available for hire. When Eva Bradley opened the email and saw the images, her reaction was visceral. "Seeing the photos, that's a terrible thing," she said. "It's a level of panic. All I can think is that my daughter?" The family studied the images obsessively. Brad later described them as unsettling. The woman's facial features, particularly her nose and chin, bore striking similarities to Amy. But what stood out most was how the woman was positioned in the photographs. She was arranged in a way that would conceal where Amy's distinctive tattoos would be. The Bradleys hired a forensic detective to analyze the photos. Using facial recognition techniques that measure proportions that don't change over time, the distance between eyes, cheekbone structure, chin shape, the analyst concluded the images showed a perfect match for Amy Bradley. The FBI conducted their own analysis. Special Agent Aaron Sheridan later stated, "We did follow that lead. The difficult part is, back then, information such as that or pictures such as that, you cannot tell when they're altered." The technology available in 2005 wasn't sophisticated enough to definitively authenticate the images or determine when they were taken. The FBI determined the photos were highly likely to be Amy, but couldn't confirm it conclusively. The discovery suggested Amy might still be alive, trapped in the Caribbean adult industry, unable to escape. For the Bradleys, it was simultaneously the most hopeful and most horrifying development in their search. But the photographs led nowhere. The website had been taken down. The person who sent the email remained anonymous. Despite extensive efforts to trace the images or locate the woman in them, investigators hit another dead end. Other sightings continued to trickle in. In 2005, a woman named Judy Moorer came forward claiming she had seen someone she believed was Amy in a department store restroom in Barbados. According to Moorer, the woman introduced herself as Amy from Virginia and appeared to be under the control of men who were waiting for her outside. The woman seemed frightened, trying to communicate something before being hurried away. Each new sighting kept hope alive while simultaneously deepening the family's frustration. Every lead seemed credible in the moment, but dissolved under investigation. And then came one of the most heartbreaking chapters in their ordeal. In the fall of 1999, a man named Frank Jones contacted the Bradleys. He claimed to be a former U.S. Army Special Forces officer with connections and resources. He said he knew where Amy was being held. In Curacao, he told them, guarded by armed Colombian men. Jones presented himself as someone who could help. He claimed to have an eyewitness, a cook who had accurately described Amy's tattoos and even mentioned a lullaby she supposedly sang, one that Eva Bradley had taught her daughter. He said he had former Navy SEALs ready to conduct an armed extraction, but he needed funding to undertake the operation. The Bradleys were desperate. If there was even a chance, even the smallest possibility, that Jones could bring their daughter home, how could they not try? They began sending money, first $100,000, then more as Jones requested additional funds to underwrite the rescue mission. Jones even provided what he claimed was proof of surveillance, a photograph of a woman with tattoos similar to Amy's. The total reached $210,000. Jones instructed the Bradleys to fly to Florida and wait in a hotel for his call. As soon as Amy was recovered, he would contact them. Ron and Eva flew to Florida and waited. Days passed. A week passed. They sat in that hotel room, jumping every time the phone rang, desperately hoping the next call would be the one telling them their daughter was safe. The call that finally came was not from Jones. It was from one of his associates, another victim who had been duped. The entire operation was a scam. Jones was a con artist who had exploited their desperation and hope for financial gain. There was no rescue mission. There were no Navy SEALs. Amy wasn't in the location he had described. It was all lies designed to extract money from a grieving family. Ron Bradley would later reflect on that devastating experience with quiet pain in his voice. If there's a chance, what else do you do? If it was your child, what would you do? So I guess we took a chance, and I guess we lost. The emotional toll on the Bradley family was immeasurable. Every birthday became a reminder of Amy's absence. Every holiday felt incomplete. Every milestone she should have celebrated, career achievements she should have had, relationships she should have built. All of it existed only as ghosts of what might have been. Ron and Eva maintained Amy's room in their Virginia home exactly as she had left it. Her belongings remained untouched, waiting for her return. Her car sat in the driveway, the gas tank still full from when she had last driven it before the cruise. The case challenged everything: relationships, faith, the basic assumptions about how the world works. How does a family move forward when they don't know if their loved one is alive or dead, suffering or at peace? The Bradleys chose to believe Amy was alive. It was the only way they could continue. "If I stop believing she's alive," Eva said, "then I lose her twice." By 2010, 12 years to the day after her disappearance, a court officially declared Amy Lynn Bradley dead. The declaration was a legal formality necessary for estate and financial matters. But for the Bradleys, it meant nothing. No physical remains had ever been recovered. No definitive proof of death existed. In their hearts, Amy was still out there, waiting to be found. As years turned into decades, the world changed dramatically. The cruise industry implemented new safety protocols and missing person procedures, in part because of cases like Amy's. International Cruise Victims, an advocacy organization, was formed to support families dealing with disappearances at sea. Congressional hearings examined cruise ship security issues, leading to legislative reforms including the Cruise Vessel Security and Safety Act of 2010, which mandated that cruise lines immediately report crimes to the FBI and maintain better security measures. But for the Bradleys, these changes couldn't undo what had happened. They couldn't bring Amy home. The story of Alistair Douglas, the bassist with the yellow hair, continued to be central to much of the speculation. After the investigation, Royal Caribbean reportedly fired him for fraternizing with a passenger, a violation of company policy. He returned to his native Grenada, where he largely disappeared from public view. In 2024, investigative journalist James Renner tracked Douglas down and conducted what was described as the first published interview with him in 2 decades. Renner discovered that Douglas had undergone a dramatic life transformation. Now in his 50s, Douglas lived in a remote mountain community in Grenada, where he served as a reverend at a small church. He had also taken up the practice of performing spiritual rituals, a striking departure from his days as a cruise ship entertainer. During the interview, Douglas maintained his innocence. He described his recollection of the last night Amy was seen, stating that she had approached him after the band's performance, complimented their set, and mentioned she played saxophone. He reiterated that he saw her walk away after having drinks with the band and had no knowledge of what happened to her afterward. Douglas also spoke about the impact the case had on his life. "I have lost contracts on other ships," he said. "People wanted me to come for a couple of months, good-paying work, but once my name was entered, they would say that I had something to do with this missing girl, and I lost the opportunity." He denied ever being on the beach in Curaçao, where Carmichael claimed to have seen Amy with someone resembling him. "I avoid beaches," Douglas stated simply. The interview didn't provide closure. It couldn't. But it showed a man living with the shadow of suspicion, his life irrevocably altered by one night on a cruise ship decades ago. As of 2025, 27 years after that March morning when Ron Bradley woke to find his daughter gone, the investigation into Amy Lynn Bradley's disappearance remains officially open. The FBI continues to maintain her missing persons page, which includes age-progressed images showing what Amy might look like now at 51 years old. In July 2025, Netflix released a 3-part documentary series titled Amy Bradley is Missing. The series brought renewed attention to the case, featuring new interviews with FBI agents, Amy's friends and family, and various witnesses who had reported sightings over the years. Within weeks of the documentary's premiere, the Bradley family reported receiving thousands of new tips through their website and social media channels. Interestingly, many of these tips came from people in Australia, Scotland, and South Africa, rather than the Caribbean, where Amy actually disappeared. The geographic distribution puzzled investigators, but showed that global awareness had increased dramatically. In July 2025, podcast host Ethan Klein announced on the H3 podcast that he would offer a $1 million reward for information leading to Amy's whereabouts. Combined with the FBI's reward and the family's standing offer, the total incentive now exceeded $1 million. The announcement went viral. Social media platforms filled with discussions about Amy's disappearance. Videos analyzing the case garnered millions of views. True crime communities mobilized, re-examining evidence with fresh eyes and modern analytical tools. But despite the publicity, despite the substantial rewards, despite decades of investigation and countless hours of volunteer research, the fundamental questions remain unanswered. What happened to Amy Lynn Bradley in those 30 minutes between 5:30 and 6 a.m. on March 24, 1998? Did she walk off that balcony to meet someone? Or was she taken, forced from the ship before anyone realized she was gone? Were the sightings reported by Carmichael, Hefner, and others genuine encounters with a captive woman trying desperately to communicate her situation? Or were they cases of mistaken identity, the desperate hope of a family projected onto strangers? Were the photographs sent in 2005 actually images of Amy, evidence that she had been trafficked? Or were they cruel manipulations designed to torment a grieving family? And what of Alistair Douglas? Was he simply an unfortunate musician whose chance encounter with Amy made him a perpetual suspect? Or does he know more than he has ever revealed? The answers remain locked somewhere in memories that will not speak or in silences that can never be broken. Ron and Iva Bradley are now in their late 70s and early 80s. They have spent more than half their lives searching for their daughter. More than half their lives in a state of not knowing, waiting for answers that may never come. Brad Bradley, now in his 50s, continues to manage the family's social media presence and respond to tips that still arrive regularly. He has spent his entire adult life as the brother of a missing woman, carrying that identity alongside his own. "We've never stopped looking," Brad said in a recent interview. "Not for one single day. Every tip, every lead, every possibility, we follow it. Because what else can we do? She's our family." The case of Amy Lynn Bradley has become emblematic of broader issues at the intersection of international travel, jurisdictional complexities, and human trafficking. According to the International Labor Organization, approximately 4.8 million people worldwide are trapped in forced situations. Many are held through psychological manipulation, threats, dependency, and isolation that makes escape nearly impossible. Victims may be moved frequently between locations, making them difficult to track. Some are hidden in plain sight. If Amy was trafficked, she would have faced all these obstacles. Even if she tried to signal for help, as David Carmichael's account suggests, the presence of handlers would make actual escape extraordinarily difficult. A captive might have only seconds to communicate distress to a stranger, and even then, the stranger would need to recognize the situation for what it was and act immediately. The question that haunts everyone involved is, how many opportunities might have slipped away? How many people might have seen Amy over the years and not realized who she was? How many potential rescues were lost because someone didn't know about the case, didn't see the flyers, didn't connect the woman in front of them to the missing person from Virginia? The Bradley family's website remains active. It contains detailed information about Amy's case, timelines, descriptions of her distinguishing features, and age-progressed photographs. The Help Find Amy Lynn Bradley Facebook page has more than 10,000 followers. Posts about her case regularly receive hundreds of shares. This digital presence ensures that Amy's case remains alive in public consciousness. New generations who were not born when she disappeared learn her story through streaming documentaries and social media posts. Yet, for all the attention, for all the investigation, for all the analysis and discussion, the central mystery endures. Where is Amy Lynn Bradley? Psychologists who work with families of missing persons describe this as ambiguous loss, a unique form of grief that has no resolution. There is no funeral, no grave to visit, no definitive moment when mourning can begin. Instead, there is an endless waiting, a constant state of not knowing. The not knowing is the worst part, Eva Bradley has said. If we knew she had passed, we could grieve and try to move on, but we don't know. And as long as we don't know, we have to keep looking. This determination to keep searching, despite the passage of 27 years, speaks to something fundamental about family bonds. It defies rational calculations that might suggest the odds grow smaller with each passing year. It operates on a different logic entirely, the logic of hope that refuses to die, of love that cannot be extinguished by time or distance or probability. The story of Amy Lynn Bradley is ultimately a story about absence and presence, the absence of answers, of closure, of justice, but also the presence of love that endures beyond understanding, of hope that survives against all odds, of determination that refuses to be extinguished. Behind every missing person poster, every unsolved case, there is a family living with unbearable loss, parents who wake every morning wondering if today will bring news, siblings who navigate life with a permanent empty space beside them. For 27 years, the Bradleys have lived in this space between knowing and not knowing, between hope and despair, between the daughter they lost and the woman they still search for. They have aged, while Amy, in their memories and in the photographs they share, remains forever 23. They have celebrated holidays without her, marked milestones without her, lived entire chapters of their lives in her absence. Yet they have never accepted that absence as permanent. "She's still our daughter," Iva Bradley said. "Nothing changes that. Not time, not distance, not uncertainty. She's ours, and we're not giving up on her." As this story reaches new audiences through documentaries, podcasts, and social media, the central appeal remains unchanged. Someone, somewhere, knows what happened on that cruise ship in March 1998. Someone knows where Amy went when she left that balcony. Someone knows whether she is alive or has passed, whether she is waiting to be found or is beyond anyone's reach. That information exists. This is not a mystery that can never be solved, but one that simply has not been solved yet. The difference between those two states is the difference between permanent loss and possible recovery. It is the difference between a family forever trapped in grief and a family that can finally, after 27 years, know the truth. For the Bradleys, that truth, whatever it may be, would be better than the not knowing they have endured for more than a quarter century. The investigation continues. Technology advances. Public awareness grows. And one fact remains constant. Amy Lynn Bradley disappeared from a cruise ship 27 years ago, and her family has never stopped searching. They will not stop tomorrow. They will not stop next year. They will continue as long as they have breath, as long as there is even the smallest possibility that Amy is out there waiting. Because that is what families do. They hold on. They search. They hope. They refuse to let go. And in that refusal, in that stubborn, persistent, unbreakable determination, lies the most powerful force in the human experience, love that transcends time, distance, and even reason itself. If Amy Lynn Bradley is still alive, if someone who knows where she is hears these words, let this be clear. Your family is still looking. They have never stopped. They never will. The world is listening. The investigation continues. And a family waits, as they have waited for 27 years, ready to welcome you home. This is not the end of Amy's story. It is simply where the story pauses, waiting for its next chapter to be written, waiting for the truth that will finally bring her home. Thanks for watching. If this story got to you, hit like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so you don't miss the next mystery. See you soon.